Hey everyone, tonight we're stepping back in time, way back to the tumultuous, often terrifying world of Tudor England, where life was a precarious dance with fate and death lurked around every corner. Imagine the chill of a damp stone floor beneath your feet, the flicker of a rushlight casting dancing shadows on the walls, and the constant, unsettling awareness that a cough could turn deadly, a harvest could fail, or a single misstep could lead to ruin. You're navigating a society steeped in a profound sense of uncertainty, where unseen forces, divine will, and malevolent spirits were believed to shape every moment. You probably won't survive this era for long without a good dose of luck, or perhaps a very odd snack. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. Like and follow to keep this journey going. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're a Tudor person, and every sunrise brings with it a fresh set of anxieties. Will your child survive the measles? Will your crops yield enough to feed your family through the winter? Will your journey be safe from bandits or foul weather in such a world where scientific understanding was rudimentary and medical knowledge often limited to herbal concoctions and questionable theories? People turned to what they could understand, or at least what they believed they could influence luck, charms, and superstition. This wasn't a fringe belief held by a few eccentrics. It was deeply woven into the fabric of daily life for virtually everyone, from the lowliest peasant to the mightiest monarch. Mainstream historical fact, Tudor England was profoundly superstitious, with beliefs in good omens, bad omens, witches, fairies, and the power of charms being widespread. You might carry a dried toad in your pocket for good luck, or hang a horseshoe above your door to ward off evil. Every creak of a door, every bird song, every unexpected event could be interpreted as a sign, a message from forces beyond human comprehension. This pervasive belief system meant that people sought out tangible ways to influence their fortunes, to tip the scales of fate in their favor. It wasn't just about prayer, though that was certainly central to life. It was about taking proactive steps, however illogical they might seem to us now, to protect oneself, to secure prosperity, and to ward off the countless dangers of the age. You lived in a world where magic was still very much a living concept, albeit one often condemned by the church. And within this complex tapestry of fear and faith, certain objects and practices gained particular significance. Animals, in particular, held a special place, often imbued with symbolic power drawn from ancient traditions, biblical stories, and local folklore. You might see a black cat cross your path and instinctively touch wood, or hear the hoot of an owl and feel a shiver of dread. These were not mere animals. They were carriers of meaning, agents of fortune or misfortune. Historians still argue whether the intensity of Tudor superstition was a continuation of ancient pagan beliefs or a response to the profound uncertainties of the era, such as religious upheaval and recurrent plagues. So, when we delve into the curious habit of eating rabbit hearts for luck, you must understand that it emerged from this very soil a desperate need for control, a deep-seated belief in the power of symbols, and a willingness to embrace practices that, to our modern sensibilities, seem utterly bizarre. You're not just looking at a weird eating habit, you're peering into the very soul of Tudor fear and hope. So, you're deeply immersed in the world of Tudor anxieties, where every shadow might hold a goblin and every sneeze a premonition. Within this landscape of pervasive belief, animals and folklore were inextricably linked, serving as powerful symbols and sometimes as direct conduits for luck, healing, or misfortune. It wasn't just about spotting a magpie. Every creature, from the mighty stag to the humble mouse, carried a weight of meaning, passed down through generations of oral tradition and written lore. You would have grown up hearing tales of animals imbued with mystical properties: the swiftness of the hare, the cunning of the fox, the loyalty of the dog. These weren't just observed characteristics. They were believed to be inherent qualities that could be transferred, influenced, or even consumed. This belief was rooted in ancient pagan practices, filtered through centuries of Christianization, yet stubbornly persistent in the rural communities and even among the educated elite. Mainstream historical fact, animal symbolism was a cornerstone of medieval and Tudor folk beliefs, influencing everything from heraldry to medical practices. Think about the everyday interactions. If a robin redbreast flew into your house, it might be seen as a sign of good tidings. If a raven perched on your roof and cawed, a shiver of dread might run down your spine, signaling impending doom. These weren't mere coincidences. They were believed to be messages, warnings, or blessings delivered through the animal kingdom. You might even use animal parts directly in charms, a badger's tooth for teething babies, a piece of deer antler to ward off sickness. But not all animals were seen as equally potent, and some held particularly contradictory or complex meanings. The rabbit, for instance, was a creature of paradox in Tudor folklore. On one hand, it was a symbol of fertility and abundance. Known for its rapid breeding, this made it a natural choice for charms related to procreation or successful harvests. On the other hand, its skittish nature and quick movements also associated it with cunning, trickery, or even cowardice. Historians still argue whether the varied symbolism of animals like the rabbit stemmed from direct observation of their behavior or from more ancient, perhaps pre-Christian, cultural associations. You lived in a world where the very act of hunting, butchering, and consuming an animal was a far more intimate and direct experience than it is today. When you ate a rabbit, you were not just consuming meat, you were, in a sense, integrating a piece of that animal's essence into yourself. This visceral connection fostered the belief that certain qualities of the animal could be transferred to the consumer. If a creature was known for its speed, eating its legs might make you swift. If it was known for its hardiness, consuming its heart might make you strong. It's a bit like believing eating spinach makes you strong, but with a decidedly more medieval twist. This worldview set the stage for the specific habit we're exploring. The rabbit, a common and easily acquired animal, was already steeped in varied symbolic meanings. Its availability, combined with its existing folkloric associations, made it a prime candidate for practices aimed at drawing on its perceived attributes. You probably wouldn't survive long in Tudor England if you ignored the signs and symbols all around you, and animals provided some of the most powerful ones. You're well versed now in the pervasive animal symbolism of Tudor times, and how the rabbit, despite its seemingly humble nature, held a complex place within that framework. Let's dig deeper into rabbit's many meanings, because it's in these often contradictory interpretations that we find the fertile ground for why its heart, specifically, became such a prized commodity for luck and health. On one hand, you couldn't miss the obvious. Rabbits were incredibly prolific. You'd see them everywhere, darting through fields, burrowing under hedgerows, and breeding at an astonishing rate. This natural abundance led directly to their association with fertility, fecundity, and prosperity. If you were a Tudor farmer hoping for a bountiful harvest, or a couple praying for children, the rabbit, with its undeniable reproductive success, seemed like a living charm. Holding a rabbit's foot for luck, a habit that surprisingly persists to this day, is a direct echo of this ancient association. It's like carrying a tiny, furry fertility idol in your pocket. But then, there was the flip side. Rabbits are also notoriously timid and quick to flee. This led to associations with cunning, fear, and vulnerability. You might hear tales of a clever rabbit outwitting a hunter, or conversely, a proverb about someone being as skittish as a startled coney, a common Tudor term for a rabbit. This duality meant the rabbit wasn't simply a one-note symbol, it was a creature of paradox, embodying both life-giving power and a certain fragility. Historians still argue whether the rabbit's dual symbolism was a reflection of its observed behavior or an ancient cultural inheritance. This complex symbolic baggage made the rabbit a particularly potent candidate for folk remedies and charms. If you believed in sympathetic magic, the idea that like affects like, then consuming a part of the rabbit might transfer one of its many attributes to you. Did you want to be fruitful? Eat something from the creature of fertility. Did you want to be quick-witted or avoid danger? Perhaps its cunning could rub off on you. The very ambiguity of its meaning made it versatile, allowing people to project their specific desires onto its perceived essence. Consider, too, its accessibility. Unlike a lion's heart or a dragon's blood, neither of which were readily available in Tudor England, unless you counted particularly grumpy dragons, rabbits were a common food source. They were hunted widely, often kept in warrens for meat, and formed a significant part of the diet for all social classes, from the poorest peasant to the wealthiest noble. This meant that obtaining a rabbit, and thus its heart, was relatively easy and commonplace. It wasn't some exotic, impossibly rare ingredient. It was an everyday animal, transformed into a magical one by belief and tradition. So, when you consider the habit of eating rabbit hearts for luck, it's not just random, it's deeply rooted in this rich tapestry of Tudor folklore. The rabbit, simultaneously a symbol of life's abundance and its inherent fragility, became a potent vessel for human hopes and fears. You probably wouldn't survive long without some readily available source of food, and for the Tudor person, the rabbit offered not just sustenance, but also a tangible connection to the mystical forces they believed governed their world. Having fully appreciated the rabbit's complex symbolic life, let's now turn our attention to the specific organ at the center of our curious Tudor habit, the heart's special place. In an age before detailed anatomical knowledge and physiological understanding, the heart was seen not merely as a pump, but as the very seat of life, emotion, courage, and even the soul itself. This made it an incredibly potent and meaningful object for consumption, particularly when seeking to imbue oneself with desirable qualities. You living in Tudor times would understand the heart's significance instinctively. It was the organ that beat furiously in fear, pounded with love, and stopped entirely in death. Its constant motion was proof of life, its cessation, the ultimate end. Therefore, while consuming a heart, any heart, was believed to be an act of profound transference, taking on the essence, the vigor, and the spirit of the creature from which it came. This belief wasn't just limited to rabbits. Brave warriors in various cultures were known to eat the hearts of their fallen enemies to gain their courage. Mainstream historical fact. Across many ancient and medieval cultures, the heart was considered the most vital organ, representing life force and emotion. Beyond its physical properties, the heart also held immense symbolic weight in religious and philosophical thought. It was the core of a person's being, the wellspring of their character. To lose heart meant to lose courage. To have a pure heart signified moral uprightness. This rich tapestry of meaning made the rabbit's heart a particularly potent charm. It wasn't just about gaining the rabbit's perceived fertility or cunning. It was about tapping into the very core of its life force, its vitality. Historians still argue whether the consumption of animal hearts was a desperate measure born of ignorance or a logical extension of sympathetic magic. Either way, for the Tudor individual, it made a strange kind of sense. If you wanted to feel brave, you sought the essence of bravery. If you wanted vitality, you sought the very seat of life. The preparation of the heart also added to its special place. It wasn't just tossed into a stew like other offal. Often, it would be treated with reverence, sometimes consumed raw or lightly cooked, suggesting a desire to preserve its raw power and transfer it as directly as possible. This was a ritual act, not just a meal. You might hold the small, still organ in your hand, feeling its cold weight, imagining the life that once pulsed within it, and believing that life force was about to become yours. So, when the Tudor person considered eating a rabbit heart for luck, they weren't just picking a random organ. They were choosing the most symbolically powerful part of an animal already imbued with a myriad of meanings. It was a concentrated dose of perceived life, vitality, and fortune, offered as a potent antidote to the uncertainties of their daily existence. You probably wouldn't survive a serious illness in Tudor England, making any perceived boost to your life force seem incredibly appealing. You felt the weight of the rabbit's heart in your hand, understood its symbolic gravity. Now, let's place this curious habit within its broader context. Luck and superstition reigns supreme in Tudor England. This wasn't just a quirky sidebar to everyday life. It was the bedrock upon which many decisions were made. Fears were assuaged and hopes were built. Every action, every event could be tinged with an underlying belief in fortune, fate, or the intervention of unseen forces. Imagine navigating your day. You might meticulously check the lunar calendar before planting crops, hoping for a bountiful yield. You might refuse to start a journey on a Friday, fearing ill luck. If you heard a dog howl at night, a shiver would run down your spine, signaling impending death or disaster. These weren't silly notions for the Tudor person. They were deeply ingrained truths, as real and impactful as the changing seasons or the taste of bread. Mainstream historical fact, superstition permeated all levels of Tudor society, influencing daily routines, significant life events, and even state decisions. This pervasive belief system arose from a world that felt largely unpredictable and uncontrollable. Disease could strike without warning, harvests could fail, and political turmoil could erupt overnight, without scientific explanations for many natural phenomena. People sought comfort and perceived control in magical thinking. If you could appease a spirit, wear a charm, or perform a ritual, you felt you were actively participating in shaping your destiny, rather than passively awaiting whatever fate decreed. Historians still argue whether the intensity of Tudor superstition was a coping mechanism for widespread uncertainty or a continuation of much older pagan traditions that subtly survived Christianization. Perhaps it was a bit of both. You might pray devoutly in church on Sunday, but still carry a hagstone in your pocket for protection on Monday. There was often no perceived conflict between faith and folk belief. They simply operated on different planes of influence. The concept of luck itself was paramount. It wasn't just random chance. It was a tangible force that could be courted, captured, or lost. Objects, actions, even certain words could be imbued with luck-bringing or luck-sapping power. This made remedies like the rabbit heart all the more appealing. They weren't just cures, they were concentrated doses of positive fortune, meant to tip the scales in your favor. If you felt cursed by ill luck, a rabbit heart offered a visceral, immediate countermeasure. This mindset also meant that anything unusual or powerful was seen as having potential efficacy. The life-giving essence of the heart, combined with the rabbit's contradictory symbolism, made it a prime candidate for such beliefs. It provided a tangible connection to the unseen forces that people believed governed their lives. You probably wouldn't survive long in Tudor England if you dismissed all omens and charms, as they provided a sense of agency in a world where true control was often an elusive dream. With luck and superstition acting as your guiding stars in Tudor England, it's no surprise that when illness struck, your remedies would often seem, to our modern eyes, utterly baffling, bordering on the horrifying. This brings us to ailments and old cures, and the grim reality of Tudor medicine, which often paved the way for practices like eating rabbit hearts. Imagine the common cold transforming into a life-threatening fever, or a small cut festering into a deadly infection. Without antibiotics, advanced surgical techniques, or even a basic understanding of germ theory, disease was a terrifying, unpredictable force. Your options for recovery were few and far between. You might consult a local wise woman, a village healer, or a barber surgeon. Remember them from our last journey. They really were everywhere, but their treatments were often a bizarre mix of herbal lore, astrological timing, and practices that tested the limits of human credulity. Mainstream historical fact. Tudor medicine relied heavily on the theory of humors, believing illness resulted from an imbalance of the body's four vital fluids. So, what might you be offered for a persistent cough, perhaps a concoction of boiled snails, thought to ease the chest, or a poultice of pigeon dung applied directly to your skin, believed to draw out fever? For a headache, You might be advised to tie a rope around your head or to rub a dead mole on the affected area. It was a veritable smorgasbord of the strange and stomach-churning. Historians still argue whether some of these remedies, despite their grotesque nature, offered any accidental therapeutic benefit due to the presence of unisolated chemical compounds in herbs or animal parts. This is where the consumption of animal parts, including the rabbit heart, fits in a world where direct, effective pharmaceutical solutions were non-existent. People turned to sympathetic magic and the perceived power of life itself. If a part of an animal was believed to possess a particular quality, courage, vitality, fertility, then consuming that part was seen as a logical way to transfer that quality to the ailing or unlucky human. It's like a medieval energy drink, but with considerably more fur. The logic, however flawed, was rooted in observation and a desperate desire for efficacy. If a specific animal was hardy, its organs might transfer hardiness. If it was known for its quick movements, perhaps its essence could speed recovery. You weren't just eating food, you were engaging in a form of therapeutic ritual. Believing that you were absorbing the very essence of life and power from the creature, the overall mood around illness was one of grim determination. People expected to be unwell often, and to try anything, no matter how unappetizing or strange. For relief, this willingness to embrace unusual cures made the leap to eating a rabbit heart for specific ailments or general luck seem less like an outlier and more like another entry in a very long list of desperate remedies. You probably wouldn't survive many of the Tudor medical interventions, but the very act of trying them offered a psychological comfort, a sense that you were fighting back against the invisible forces of disease and misfortune. So, you're accustomed to the strange and sometimes repulsive remedies of Tudor medicine? This mindset naturally extended to the kitchen, blurring the lines between what was consumed for nourishment and what was ingested for therapeutic or magical purposes. This brings us to food as medicine, a concept far more integral to Tudor life than you might imagine, and crucial to understanding the rabbit heart habit. You see, every plant, every animal, every part of every creature was believed to possess certain inherent qualities that could influence the human body. This wasn't just about vitamins or nutrients, concepts entirely unknown to the Tudors. It was about hot and cold properties, wet and dry qualities, and sympathetic connections. If you had a cold ailment, you needed hot foods to balance it. If you were feeling melancholic, an excess of black bile. Remember, you might be prescribed foods believed to cheer the spirit. Mainstream historical fact, the humoral theory, which categorized foods by their hot, cold, wet, and dry properties, heavily influenced Tudor dietary and medicinal practices. This belief meant that your daily meals weren't just about satisfying hunger. They were a constant form of self-medication, a way to maintain or restore balance within your body. A strong broth might be prescribed for weakness, not just for calories, but for its perceived restorative essence. Certain herbs were added to dishes, not just for flavor, but for their purported healing properties. It was a holistic view, where every bite could potentially serve a dual purpose. Historians still argue whether the elaborate and often strange food combinations in Tudor cookbooks were primarily culinary preferences or dictated by underlying humoral theories and medicinal beliefs. Probably a bit of both, often intertwined so deeply it was hard to tell where the cook's art ended and the healer's craft began. You might find a recipe for a dish that sounds delicious, only to realize it's specifically for treating indigestion or for boosting courage. This concept of food as medicine made the consumption of animal organs, particularly those imbued with symbolic power like the rabbit heart, a logical step. It wasn't just about eating a piece of meat, it was about ingesting concentrated qualities. If a rabbit was considered nimble and fertile, then its heart, the very core of its life force, would be seen as a potent way to gain those attributes. It was a more direct, visceral way to consume medicine than a brewed herbal tea. Consider how commonplace it was to eat various parts of an animal. Head cheese, liver puddings, kidney pies. These were not exotic delicacies but common fare, ensuring that no part of a valuable animal went to waste. This familiarity with consuming offal made the idea of eating a heart less repulsive to the Tudor palate than it might be to many modern diners. It was simply another part of the creature, and if that part offered an additional magical benefit, then all the better. So, when a Tudor person ate a rabbit heart for luck, they weren't just being superstitious. They were acting within a well-established cultural framework where food itself was seen as a powerful agent of change, a direct conduit for influencing one's physical and spiritual well-being. It was the ultimate comfort food, offering not just nourishment, but a dose of hope in a very uncertain world. You probably wouldn't survive long on a diet that lacked this inherent medicinal quality, and your Tudor stomach was certainly more robust than ours. You've internalized the Tudor idea that food is medicine, and that every morsel can have a deeper purpose. This wasn't just a peasant's belief, either. Even at rich noble tables, odd habits persisted, demonstrating that superstition in the consumption of peculiar animal parts for luck or health was a practice that transcended the social strata of Tudor England. Imagine yourself in a grand Tudor manor house, the hall ablaze with candlelight, platters laden with roasted meats and elaborate confections. You might expect sophistication and adherence to proper etiquette, and while courtly manners were certainly present, so too was a surprising continuation of folk beliefs and dietary practices that to our modern sensibilities would seem very, very strange. Mainstream historical fact. Even educated and wealthy Tudors, including members of the royal court, practiced various forms of superstition and folk medicine. While the peasantry might consume a rabbit heart out of desperation for luck, a noble might partake for slightly different reasons, perhaps to bolster courage before a joust, to ensure fertility for an heir, or to ward off the endemic diseases that plagued all classes equally. The fear of illness and misfortune knew no social boundaries, making even the most privileged receptive to any perceived advantage. You probably wouldn't survive a serious illness any better than a peasant if you weren't careful, so any perceived edge was worth pursuing. Think of the lavish banquets. While roasted swans and boars' heads were centerpieces, offal was still a common and often prized part of the diet. Kidneys, livers, and tongues were consumed. So the concept of eating an animal heart wasn't inherently repulsive. The difference at a noble table might be in the presentation or the ritual surrounding its consumption. Perhaps a rabbit heart, dried and powdered, would be secretly mixed into a spiced wine, or a tiny, perfectly prepared heart offered discreetly on a small silver plate. Historians still argue whether the participation of the nobility in such practices was genuine belief or a pragmatic adaptation. Recognizing the power of popular superstitions to influence their own health and fate, it's likely a mix. A cynical courtier might scoff at a peasant's charm, but still secretly consult an astrologer or consume a specific animal part before a crucial negotiation or battle. After all, what was there to lose if it might work? It's a bit like wearing your lucky socks to a big meeting, but with more organic material involved. The secrecy around such practices at noble tables would have been intense. While public displays of piety were paramount, private superstitions were often kept hidden, especially if they bordered on what the church might deem sorcery. A lord or lady would not openly admit to eating a rabbit heart for luck, but the practice might be quietly passed down through household servants or trusted confidants. This private indulgence in peculiar habits speaks volumes about the pervasive grip of superstition, even on those who outwardly presented an image of sophisticated enlightenment. So, when you consider the rabbit heart habit, don't imagine it solely confined to the smoke-filled cottages of the common folk. It permeated the grand halls and whispered secrets of the elite as well, a testament to the universal human desire for control over an unpredictable world. The rabbit heart, a humble organ, found its way onto plates and into potions across the entire social spectrum, demonstrating that in the face of uncertainty, everyone was looking for a little bit of luck, wherever they could find it. You've seen that even the most privileged Tudors weren't immune to peculiar habits, secretly partaking in practices like eating rabbit hearts. This susceptibility extended all the way to the very top. Royal interest in charms, The monarchs themselves, figures of immense power and divine right, surprisingly engaged with personal superstitions and talismans, demonstrating that the need for luck and protection transcended even the crown. Imagine King Henry IV, a man who reshaped a nation and challenged the Pope, secretly consulting an astrologer before making a crucial decision, or perhaps carrying a small, personally blessed amulet into battle. Or Queen Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, renowned for her intellect and political acumen, possessing a vast collection of charms and rings believed to protect her from illness or witchcraft. These weren't just curiosities. They were deeply held convictions that even royal authority could not dismiss. Mainstream historical fact: Tudor monarchs, despite their outward displays of religious piety and power, often had personal physicians and advisors who dabbled in astrology, alchemy, and various forms of folk medicine. Why would a monarch supposedly chosen by God and possessing immense earthly power still cling to such superstitions? Because life, even for royalty, was incredibly precarious. Succession was often uncertain, plots were rife, and death from disease or accident was a constant threat. In such an unpredictable world, any perceived edge, any extra layer of protection was eagerly embraced. If a simple rabbit heart, consumed with the right intention, might grant a whisper of good fortune, why wouldn't a monarch facing such immense pressures? Consider it. It's like wearing your lucky underwear to a state dinner, but with higher stakes and more traditional ingredients. Historians still argue whether royal engagement with charms and astrology was a genuine personal belief, a political tool to appear connected to popular sentiment, or simply a reflection of the best available science and medicine of the era. It was likely a complex blend of all three. A monarch might genuinely believe in the power of a talisman while simultaneously using it to project an image of divine favor and invincibility to their subjects. The secrecy around these royal superstitions would have been even greater than for common folk. Any public display of reliance on magic could be interpreted as weakness, ungodliness, or a sign of being manipulated by dark forces. Thus, any rabbit heart consumed by royalty would have been done so in the utmost privacy, likely prepared by a trusted servant or a clandestine cunning man operating on the fringes of the court. You wouldn't find it on the official royal menu, that's for sure. The existence of such practices at the highest levels of society further validates the widespread nature of the rabbit heart habit. It wasn't just a quaint belief of the uneducated, it was a deeply human response to uncertainty, a universal quest for luck and protection that transcended status, wealth, and even outward religious conformity. You probably wouldn't survive a serious challenge to the throne without every possible advantage. And for Tudor monarchs, a touch of personal magic was just another arrow in their quiver. So, you've discovered that even the Tudor monarchs, despite their power, sought a little extra luck. But for the average Tudor person, acquiring a rabbit heart wasn't a matter of royal decree. It was a practical consequence of everyday life, intimately tied to hunting and rabbiting. These activities were not just sport, they were crucial for sustenance and a common part of the rural economy, ensuring that rabbits and their potent hearts were readily available. Imagine yourself in the Tudor countryside, the air crisp and perhaps a light mist hanging over the fields. You'd see rabbit warrens everywhere, carefully managed areas where rabbits were bred for meat and fur. Poaching was a serious crime, punishable harshly, but legitimate hunting and trapping of rabbits was a widespread activity, providing a vital source of protein for all social classes, especially the common folk. Mainstream historical fact: rabbits were a staple food source in Tudor England, extensively hunted and farmed in warrens. Hunting rabbits often involved ferrets to flush them out of their burrows, or nets, snares, and even bows and arrows. It was a skill passed down through generations, a necessary part of rural survival. The average Tudor household, whether peasant or yeoman, would likely consume rabbit meat regularly, perhaps once or twice a week, depending on their means and the success of their hunting. This meant that the animal's organs, including the heart, were always at hand after the butchering process. You probably wouldn't survive long without a consistent source of protein, and rabbits were an excellent, accessible option. This constant availability of rabbits facilitated the growth of the rabbit heart habit. It wasn't about seeking out an exotic, rare creature for its magical properties. It was about taking a specific, symbolically powerful part from an animal that was already on your dinner table. The heart, often discarded by more squeamish modern palates, was a valuable piece of offal in Tudor times, eaten along with other internal organs to ensure no part of the animal went to waste. This practical aspect made the consumption of the heart feel less like an extraordinary magical act and more like an extension of everyday culinary and survival practices. Historians still argue whether the widespread availability of rabbits fostered the belief in their heart's magical properties, or if pre-existing beliefs encouraged their consumption. It was likely a symbiotic relationship, where the commonality of the animal made it a natural candidate for the projection of superstitious beliefs. If rabbits were everywhere, and people needed luck, why not use what was at hand? It's a bit like believing your lucky penny works because you keep finding pennies. So, for the Tudor person, the rabbit heart wasn't something you had to specially procure from a distant sorcerer. It came directly from your own efforts, or from your local butcher, or from the hunt that supplied your village. This close, practical connection to the animal, from field to table, made the act of consuming its heart a tangible and accessible way to invite luck, courage, or fertility into your life. You'd gut the rabbit, prepare the meat, and then, with a flicker of hope and a silent intention, carefully set aside the small, powerful heart for its special purpose. You've seen how abundant rabbits were, making their hearts readily available. This constant presence on the Tudor table created a fascinating shift, the transition of the rabbit heart from a mere culinary item to a powerful, mystical one. It was a journey from pot to potion, blurring the lines between sustenance and supernatural aid. Imagine a busy Tudor kitchen, the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat in the air. A rabbit, freshly caught, is being butchered. The meat is destined for a stew or a pie, but the small, muscular heart is carefully set aside. For the common Tudor person, this wasn't waste, it was opportunity. It was a shift in perspective, where a simple organ became a vessel for hope, fear, and deep-seated superstition. Mainstream historical fact: while offal was commonly consumed for sustenance, specific animal organs were often imbued with additional symbolic or magical properties in Tudor folk belief. This transformation from food to charm wasn't about complex alchemical processes or elaborate rituals, though some might add small rituals later. It was about intent, the very act of separating the heart, recognizing its symbolic power, and preparing it with a specific purpose in mind elevated it beyond mere nutrition. It became a tangible link to desired qualities: courage, fertility, luck. You might roast it alongside the rest of the rabbit, but when you ate that particular morsel, your intention would be entirely different. Historians still argue whether the practical availability of the rabbit heart led to its folkloric significance, or if pre-existing beliefs about hearts and rabbits made it a natural choice for magical purposes. It's likely a symbiotic relationship. Its commonality meant it was always at hand for those who were desperate enough, or superstitious enough, to try anything. It was like finding a shiny pebble and deciding it's your new lucky charm, but with a beating, or recently beating, component. The rabbit heart held a unique position because it was accessible to everyone, rich or poor. Unlike rare herbs or precious stones, a rabbit could be caught, bought, or traded by anyone. This democratized the magic, making powerful charms available to the masses. This broad accessibility also meant the habit spread easily through communities, fueled by shared fears and common desires. If your neighbor swore by it and seemed to be having a run of good luck, you might be tempted to try it too. So the rabbit heart didn't need to be chemically altered to become a potion. Its power lay in belief, intention, and its symbolic weight within Tudor culture. From the cooking pot, where it was just another piece of meat, it was elevated to a magical object, a compact bundle of perceived luck and life force, ready to be consumed for whatever ailed you, or whatever fortune you sought. You probably wouldn't survive long on just rabbit hearts, but a little bit of perceived luck could go a very long way in a hard Tudor life. You've witnessed the rabbit heart's transformation from mundane protein to potential charm. Now, let's consider the crucial next step, the money preparation rituals that surrounded its consumption. This wasn't always a simple act of eating. Often, the heart was subjected to specific methods and timings, designed to maximize its mystical potency and ensure the transfer of desired qualities. Imagine you've acquired a fresh rabbit heart. It wouldn't simply be thrown into a stew like the rest of the meat. Instead, you might carefully clean it, perhaps dry it, or even prepare it in a very particular way. One common method was to consume it raw, or very lightly seared, believed to preserve its live essence and ensure the direct transfer of vitality and courage. The idea was that the raw, untamed power of the animal would flow directly into you. You'd hold the small, firm organ, perhaps close your eyes for a moment, and then swallow it with grim determination, focusing on the quality you wish to gain. Mainstream historical fact. The consumption of raw or minimally cooked animal organs was a feature of various folk remedies and magical practices in medieval and early modern Europe. Another preparation might involve drying and pulverizing the heart into a powder. This powder could then be mixed into a drink, perhaps wine, ale, or even water, making it easier to consume, particularly if the thought of eating a raw heart was too unpalatable. The act of grinding it to dust and then ingesting it allowed for a more discreet and perhaps symbolically more refined form of consumption. This method was also practical for storage, allowing the charm to be kept for future use or even transported for a journey. Historians still argue whether the choice of preparation method reflected regional variations in belief or simply practical considerations of storage and palatability. The timing of consumption was also often critical. Superstitious beliefs about lunar cycles, specific days of the week, or even certain hours could dictate when the heart should be eaten. For instance, you might be advised to consume it under a full moon for fertility or at dawn for courage before a difficult day. These prescribed timings added an extra layer of ritual and believed efficacy, making the act feel more powerful and less like mere happenstance. It was like following a medieval recipe that included an astrological chart. Sometimes a brief incantation or silent prayer would accompany the act of consumption, focusing the intention of the eater. You might whisper a few words, affirming your desire for luck or bravery as you swallowed the heart. This personal ritual served to reinforce the belief and mentally connect the act with the desired outcome, enhancing the placebo effect that was often at the core of these practices. The very notion of these preparation rituals highlights the deep belief in sympathetic magic. It wasn't just what you ate, but how and when you ate it that mattered. Every step was designed to harness and transfer the rabbit's perceived attributes, its quickness, its fecundity, its timid heart that pounded in the face of danger. You probably wouldn't survive long on a diet exclusively of raw hearts, but the ritual of consuming just one, prepared with solemn intention, offered a powerful psychological boost against the uncertainties of Tudor life. You've meticulously prepared your rabbit heart, perhaps following precise timings and whispered intentions. But what ultimate goal drove you to consume this unusual morsel? For many Tudors, one primary motivation stood out: eating for courage. In a world rife with physical danger, social pressures, and the constant threat of war or rebellion, bravery was not just a virtue. It was often a necessity for survival. Imagine facing a daunting challenge, a legal dispute that could cost you your land, a public speech that could bolster or break your reputation, or even the prospect of going into battle. Fear, a very real and debilitating emotion, could paralyze you. In such moments, a rabbit heart, with its symbolic connection to life force and the very essence of an animal that, though timid, possessed incredible vitality and quickness, offered a desperate psychological boost. Mainstream historical fact. The belief in consuming animal organs for desirable qualities, especially courage from fierce animals, was prevalent in various historical cultures. The logic, from a sympathetic magic perspective, was simple. The heart was the seat of courage. By consuming the heart of a creature, even a small rabbit, you would absorb its inherent bravery, or at least its ability to act decisively in the face of danger. It wasn't about making you fearless, but about giving you the strength to overcome paralyzing fear, to stand firm when your knees wanted to buckle. You might swallow it just before a difficult encounter, hoping its essence would steal your resolve. It's like a medieval courage pill, but with more organic texture. Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits were purely psychosomatic, or if the very act of consuming something so unusual, so taboo to modern sensibilities, acted as a powerful self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believed you were now braver, you would act braver, thus appearing courageous to others and reinforcing your own belief. This placebo effect, magnified by deep superstition, was likely the true magic at play. This wasn't just about grand acts of heroism. It was also about everyday courage, the courage to endure hardship, to face a tyrannical lord, or to simply get through another grueling day. The Tudor world demanded resilience, and any perceived aid in cultivating that inner strength was valuable. You probably wouldn't survive long in Tudor England if you lacked courage, and a rabbit heart offered a tangible if weird way to acquire it. The preparation often emphasized this purpose. If consumed raw, it was to retain the raw vitality. If powdered and mixed into wine, it was perhaps for a quick, potent shot of resolve before a public appearance. The intention was always clear: to absorb the vital essence that would fortify your spirit and embolden your actions. For the Tudor individual, the rabbit heart was a tiny, visceral amulet against fear, a desperate measure born of profound need in a world that constantly tested one's resolve. You'd swallow it, close your eyes, and imagine the bravery of 1,000 tiny rabbit hearts surging within you. You've considered the desperate quest for courage, but the rabbit heart's purported powers stretched beyond mere bravery. For many Tudors, it was also a potent symbol, believed to aid in the most fundamental aspects of human existence. Love and fertility charms. In a society where marriage and progeny were paramount, particularly for securing social standing and family lineage, any perceived aid in these matters was eagerly sought. Imagine a young woman pining for a suitor, or a childless couple yearning for an heir. For them, the rabbit, with its undeniable reputation for prolific breeding, was a living embodiment of fertility. Its heart, the very core of its life force, was therefore believed to be a concentrated source of this life-giving power. Consuming it was seen as a direct way to transfer this fecundity, making one more fertile or more appealing to a prospective partner. Mainstream historical fact: animal parts, particularly those from fertile creatures, were commonly used in folk remedies and charms for increasing fertility and attracting love across various historical periods. For love, the connection was often more symbolic. The heart, as the seat of emotions, was believed to influence affection. If you ate the heart of a creature, particularly one associated with life and vitality, it was thought to make your own heart more open to love or to subtly influence the affections of another towards you. You might consume it with the specific intention of drawing a particular person closer, or simply to enhance your overall allure. Historians still argue whether the belief in such charms was genuinely widespread or more prevalent among specific social classes or in rural areas. The practice wasn't just about direct consumption. Sometimes the rabbit heart might be dried, powdered, and then discreetly added to food or drink intended for the desired person, hoping to subtly charm them. This, of course, ventured into morally dubious territory, akin to the love potions we discussed in our previous journey. The intent was to manipulate, to bypass free will, using the perceived power of the heart as a catalyst. It's like a medieval version of slipping a flattering comment into someone's social media feed, but with more visceral ingredients. For couples struggling with infertility, the rabbit heart offered a tangible, if superstitious, ray of hope. When medical knowledge was limited and explanations for barrenness were often attributed to divine displeasure or unseen forces, desperate measures felt entirely rational. The act of consuming the heart was a proactive step, a ritual of intention, a way of signaling to the universe or to perceived magical forces one's fervent desire for children. The belief also extended to ensuring successful childbirth. A pregnant woman might consume a rabbit heart, or a part of one, in the hopes that it would transfer the rabbit's perceived ease of delivery and fecundity to her, ensuring a quick and safe birth. This highlights the profound anxiety surrounding childbirth in Tudor times, where maternal and infant mortality rates were incredibly high. So, while the quest for courage was a powerful motivator, the rabbit heart's use as a love and fertility charm speaks to even deeper, more fundamental human needs: the desire for companionship, for family, and for the continuation of one's lineage in a world where such matters were not just personal, but often societal imperatives. You probably wouldn't survive without hope for a family in Tudor society, making these desperate charms incredibly appealing. Beyond attracting love or ensuring fertility, the rabbit heart also served another vital, albeit grim, purpose in the superstitious Tudor world: ward off evil. In an age permeated by fears of malevolent spirits, witches, curses, and the ever-present threat of the devil, people sought every possible means of protection, and a rabbit heart was believed to be a potent, visceral shield. Imagine walking through a shadowed lane at dusk, the wind rustling through the trees, and every creak and groan of the old timbers sounding like a malevolent presence. You'd hear whispered tales of witches cursing livestock, of changelings left in cradles, or of unseen forces bringing sickness and misfortune. In such a world, fear wasn't just psychological, it was a tangible threat, and countermeasures were actively sought. Mainstream historical fact: belief in witchcraft and demonic influence was widespread in Tudor England, leading to real fears and the use of protective charms. The logic behind using a rabbit heart to ward off evil was multifaceted. Firstly, its symbolic connection to life and vitality as the seat of the soul and life force meant it was believed to be anathema to forces of death and decay. Evil, often associated with spiritual emptiness or corruption, might be repelled by such a concentrated essence of life. Secondly, the rabbit's cunning and quickness, its ability to evade predators, might be seen as a transferable quality, allowing the consumer to outwit or escape malevolent influences. It's like a medieval antivirus software, but with more organic components. You might consume the heart specifically before embarking on a dangerous journey, or when entering a place believed to be haunted or cursed. It could be taken if you suspected you were under a witch's spell, or if a sudden, unexplained misfortune befell your family or farm. The act of ingesting it was a ritual of spiritual fortification, a way to build an inner defense against unseen attackers. Historians still argue whether the use of such charms was primarily a psychological coping mechanism for fear or a genuine, albeit misguided, attempt to manipulate supernatural forces. It was likely both. The powerful belief that you were protected by consuming such a potent charm would undoubtedly reduce anxiety and instill a sense of security, regardless of any actual magical efficacy. Sometimes the rabbit heart wouldn't even be fully consumed. A small piece might be carried in a pouch, hung above a doorway, or buried beneath a threshold, especially if the intention was to protect an entire household or a specific area from evil influences. This highlights that the heart's power was believed to reside not just in ingestion, but in its very presence as a sacred or potent object. You might place it near your child's cradle, hoping it would deter any malevolent spirits from harming your infant. So, beyond the quest for love, fertility, and courage, the rabbit heart offered Tudors a deeply comforting, albeit superstitious, shield against the terrifying unknown. In a world where evil felt palpable and constantly threatening, any tangible form of protection, however bizarre to modern eyes, was eagerly embraced. You probably wouldn't survive long in Tudor England without a belief in some form of supernatural protection, and the rabbit heart offered a very accessible one. You've considered the rabbit heart as a shield against evil, but its supposed efficacy extended far beyond matters of luck and protection. For many Tudors, it was also believed to be a direct remedy, capable of curing illness. In a period where scientific understanding of disease was virtually non-existent and death a constant companion, people turned to every available means to combat sickness, no matter how unconventional. Imagine a loved one wasting away from a mysterious fever, or a child racked with fits. Desperation would drive you to try anything. While herbal remedies were common, the idea of consuming an animal organ for its healing properties was a logical extension of their medical philosophy, particularly the humoral theory. If an animal possessed vitality, its heart, the seat of life, surely held the key to restoring health. Mainstream historical fact: Tudor medicine often prescribed animal-derived remedies, believing certain organs held curative powers for specific ailments. One prevalent belief was that the rabbit heart could treat conditions associated with fear or anxiety. Given the rabbit's nervous disposition, if someone suffered from melancholy, a historical term encompassing depression and anxiety or fits of trembling, consuming a rabbit heart was believed to instill a calm fortitude, replacing fear with courage and stability. It was thought to fortify the spirit against ailments that seemed to drain one's vital energy. Historians still argue whether the psychological comfort provided by such a remedy outweighed any potential harm or offered accidental nutritional benefits. Beyond mental states, the rabbit heart was also purportedly used for physical ailments. For instance, it was sometimes prescribed for conditions related to the heart itself, or for general weakness and debility. The sympathetic magic at play here was straightforward. A strong, vital heart from an animal would strengthen a weak human heart. You might find it roasted and given to someone recovering from a long illness, believed to help them regain their strength and vigor more quickly. It's like a medieval superfood, but with considerably more folklore involved. The methods of administration for illness were similar to those for luck. The heart might be eaten raw, lightly cooked, or dried and powdered to be mixed into a broth or ale. The specific preparation often depended on the ailment and the local healer's recommendations. The intention was always to transfer the potent life force and inherent qualities of the rabbit directly to the ailing individual. You wouldn't question the logic too deeply. If conventional remedies failed, and the local healer or wise woman suggested a rabbit heart, you would likely comply out of sheer desperation. The stakes were incredibly high. Failure to recover could mean death. The act of consuming the heart offered a profound psychological comfort, a sense that you were actively fighting the disease with every available tool. However strange, it gave you, and the patient, a feeling of agency against an otherwise invisible and uncontrollable enemy. So, the rabbit heart was not just a charm, it was a perceived medicine, a desperate measure against the ravages of illness in a time when understanding disease was a terrifying mystery. Its consumption reflects the deep human need to find solutions, however bizarre, when faced with the terrifying fragility of life. You probably wouldn't survive long if you relied solely on rabbit hearts for serious illness, but for a hopeful Tudor, it was another arrow in a very sparse quiver against the relentless march of disease. You've just heard how the rabbit heart was employed against various illnesses, even those of the spirit, but perhaps one of its most poignant and desperate uses was in the realm of family, specifically for the childbirth and safety. In Tudor England, the process of giving birth was fraught with peril, a terrifying ordeal where both mother and infant faced a real and constant threat of death. Any perceived aid, however superstitious, was clutched onto with fervent hope. Imagine a heavily pregnant woman, her face pale with anxiety, approaching the final days of her term. The fear of childbirth was pervasive and rational, given the shockingly high rates of maternal and infant mortality. There were no C-sections, no sterile environments, and little understanding of complications. You would pray to saints, perhaps wear protective amulets, and often turn to folk remedies believed to ease the passage of the child and ensure the survival of both mother and baby. Mainstream historical fact: childbirth in Tudor England was incredibly dangerous, with high mortality rates for both mother and infant, leading to widespread use of folk remedies and superstitions to aid delivery and ensure survival. The rabbit heart, with its strong associations with fertility and its remarkable prolificacy, was a natural candidate for such a vital purpose. The belief was that consuming the heart would transfer the rabbit's perceived ease of birth and its ability to produce numerous offspring quickly and safely. It was thought to imbue the mother with strength, to hasten labor, and to ensure the vitality of the newborn. You might find a small, fresh rabbit heart prepared by a midwife or a close family member and given to the laboring woman to swallow, perhaps with a sip of ale or a prayer. It's like a medieval delivery room power-up, but considerably more earthy. Historians still argue whether the psychological comfort provided by such rituals genuinely aided the birthing process by reducing anxiety and tension, or if any perceived benefit was purely coincidental. The placebo effect would have been immensely powerful in such a high-stress situation. If the mother believed she had a potent charm aiding her, it might have helped her mentally, even if physiologically the heart did nothing. The consumption wasn't always limited to the mother. Sometimes a part of the rabbit heart might be given to the newborn, or placed near the baby, to ensure its continued health and ward off early childhood illnesses, which were also rampant. The goal was to imbue the fragile infant with the rabbit's resilience and life force from the very beginning. You probably wouldn't survive childbirth in Tudor England without a strong will and a hefty dose of luck. And a rabbit heart was believed to provide just that. This particular use of the rabbit heart underscores the profound anxieties and desperate hopes surrounding human reproduction in Tudor times. In a world where every life was precious and hard-won, any charm, any ritual, any strange consumption that offered a glimmer of hope for a safe delivery and a healthy child was embraced without question. The rabbit heart, a humble organ, became a symbol of life itself, a desperate plea for safety in the most perilous of human endeavors. You've just witnessed the desperate use of the rabbit heart for childbirth, highlighting the sheer terror of Tudor mortality rates. But for the heart to be truly effective in its various magical applications, its perceived qualities often hinged on its purity and potency. This meant that simply acquiring any rabbit heart wasn't enough. Specific conditions surrounding its procurement and freshness were often believed to amplify its power. Imagine a knowledgeable village elder or a cunning woman instructing you. They wouldn't just say, "Get a rabbit heart." They might specify, "It must be from a young rabbit, caught swiftly and cleanly," or "It should be consumed within the hour of the kill, while its warmth still lingers." The idea was that the fresher the heart, the more potent its life force, and thus, the more effective its transfer of courage, fertility, or luck. A heart left to decay would lose its vital essence, rendering it useless as a charm. You might shudder at the thought of eating a warm, freshly removed organ, but the perceived efficacy trumped squeamishness. Mainstream historical fact, folk remedies, and magical practices often emphasize specific conditions for ingredient procurement, such as timing or freshness, to maximize their perceived power. The type of rabbit could also be significant. While not always specified, some beliefs might have favored hearts from wild rabbits over domesticated ones, believing the wild creature possessed more untamed vitality or cunning, or perhaps a rabbit of a certain color, though less common for hearts, might be thought to carry specific attributes. These nuances added layers of complexity and perceived authenticity to the ritual, making it feel less like a random act and more like a precise, powerful, magical endeavor. Historians still argue whether the emphasis on purity and potency was a genuine belief in magical principles or a clever way to ensure the consumption of a fresh, less likely to cause illness organ. This emphasis on purity also extended to the purity of the intention. While not a strict ritual of cleansing, the person consuming the heart was often expected to have a clear mind, free from doubt or malice, to ensure the full transfer of desired qualities. If you were eating it for courage, you should focus on that intent. If for fertility, your mind should be on procreation. This mental preparation was believed to open the recipient to the heart's full power. It's like believing your vitamin works better if you truly believe in it, but with considerably higher stakes. For those seeking to ward off evil, the rabbit heart's purity was thought to be anathema to malevolent forces. A pure heart, full of life, could repel forces associated with decay and corruption. This belief often meant the heart should not be touched by anyone impure or handled with disrespect, lest its power be diminished. So, the act of consuming a rabbit heart for luck or health was rarely a casual affair. It was often a precise ritual, governed by specific conditions of procurement and freshness, all designed to ensure maximum potency. This meticulous approach underscored the deep belief in the heart's power and the desperate desire to harness every ounce of its perceived magic in a world where control over fate was a rare and precious commodity. You probably wouldn't survive long on contaminated food in Tudor England, and neither would the perceived power of your rabbit heart if it wasn't pristine. You've just discovered the intricate rules around the rabbit heart's purity and potency, hinting at the deep belief systems surrounding it. However, not everyone in Tudor England swallowed these beliefs, or the hearts, uncritically. This brings us to the inevitable presence of cunning skeptics and scoffers, individuals who, for various reasons, dismiss such practices as foolish superstition, dangerous quackery, or outright paganism. Imagine yourself in a lively tavern. A group of men gathered around a tankard of ale. One might recount a tale of his wife trying a rabbit heart for luck, only for their crops to fail regardless. Another might scoff, pure hogwash. A good prayer and hard work are all the luck a man needs. These skeptics weren't necessarily enlightened scientists. They might simply be pragmatists, or devout Christians who viewed such practices as disrespectful to God, or perhaps just unlucky individuals who had tried the remedy and found it utterly useless. You'd encounter various shades of doubt. Mainstream historical fact. While superstition was widespread, there were always individuals in Tudor society, often educated or deeply religious, who criticized or dismissed folk magical practices. One source of skepticism came from those who put their faith solely in divine providence. For them, relying on charms or animal parts was an affront to God, implying that human rituals could influence what only divine will could determine. A particularly zealous priest might openly condemn such practices from the pulpit, urging parishioners to abandon heathen superstitions and trust in prayer alone. You probably wouldn't survive being openly labeled a heretic for your beliefs, so discretion was often key. Another group of scoffers might be more practically minded. If they saw no tangible, repeatable results from eating a rabbit heart for courage or curing illness, they would simply conclude it was ineffective. My cousin ate a dozen rabbit hearts for his ague, and he still died, one might lament, concluding the practice was useless. This practical, results-oriented skepticism, though not scientifically rigorous, was a nascent form of empiricism that chipped away at the credibility of such folk remedies. Historians still argue whether the growing prominence of humanist thought in Tudor England contributed to a rise in intellectual skepticism towards folk magic, even if it didn't fully eradicate it. And then there were those who simply found the whole concept grotesque or absurd. Eating the raw heart of a rabbit, or any animal, would have been deeply unpalatable to some, regardless of its supposed magical benefits. For these individuals, the sheer repulsiveness of the act trumped any potential promise of luck. It's like being offered a lucky meal of spoiled fish. No matter the supposed benefit, your stomach simply says no. While skeptics existed, they were often a minority, and their voices might be drowned out by the pervasive belief in superstition or by the compelling anecdotal successes that continued to circulate. The human desire for hope and control, especially in desperate times, often outweighed rational doubt. However, their presence highlights that belief in the rabbit heart's power was not universal, and that even within a highly superstitious society, cracks of incredulity and pragmatic questioning could be found. You wouldn't survive an argument with someone who had unwavering faith in a charm if you were a staunch disbeliever. So polite disagreement or quiet avoidance was often the best strategy. You've just heard about the earthly skeptics who scoffed at rabbit hearts, but a far more formidable and influential critic loomed large over all such practices in Tudor England. The Church's view, Kai, as the dominant moral and spiritual authority, the Church held a complex and often contradictory stance on folk remedies and superstitions, navigating a fine line between condemning heathen practices and accommodating popular beliefs. Imagine yourself in a grand cathedral or a humble parish church, listening to the sermon. The priest, robed in vestments, might rail against superstitious practices and devilish charms that drew people away from true faith in God. For the Church, true healing and good fortune came from divine providence, prayer, and the intercession of saints, not from consuming animal organs or engaging in rituals rooted in what they often deem paganism. To seek luck or cure through such means was, in their eyes, to usurp God's will and potentially engage with demonic forces. Mainstream historical fact. The Church officially condemned many folk magical practices, including charms and potions, viewing them as idolatry or witchcraft, though enforcement varied. However, the reality on the ground was far more nuanced. While condemning outright witchcraft and sorcery, which carried severe penalties, the Church often tolerated or even subtly incorporated many white magic or folk remedies, especially those that didn't overtly invoke demons. Many practices were seen as merely foolish superstitions, rather than outright heresy. A common priest, living among his parishioners, might himself hold some traditional beliefs or, at least, understand the deep need for comfort and perceived agency that such practices provided. Historians still argue whether the Church's pragmatic tolerance of some folk beliefs was a strategic move to maintain popular support or simply a reflection of the difficulty in eradicating deeply ingrained cultural practices. The tension lay in definition. Was eating a rabbit heart for courage, a trust in God, or a reliance on a forbidden charm? It often depended on the intent of the person and the interpretation of the local ecclesiastical authorities. If it was seen as a simple, misguided attempt at good fortune, it might warrant a reprimand or penance. If it was linked to explicit invocation of spirits or a perceived attempt to coerce supernatural powers, it could lead to far graver accusations, potentially even witchcraft trials. You lived in a society where confession was central to spiritual life. If you admitted to consuming a rabbit heart, your confessor might ask about your intentions. Were you trusting in the heart itself, or asking God to bless your efforts through this charm? The answers would determine the severity of your penance. This constant moral scrutiny meant that while the practice continued, it often did so quietly, away from the direct gaze of the most zealous church officials. It's like having a guilty pleasure that you'd never admit to your most pious relatives. Ultimately, the Church's view created a complex moral landscape for the Tudor person. You sought luck and health in a precarious world, but you also feared for your eternal soul. The rabbit heart, a symbol of hope, also carried with it the subtle shadow of potential sin, making its consumption a deeply personal and often furtive act performed at the intersection of desperation and faith. You probably wouldn't survive excommunication in Tudor England, so navigating these religious strictures was crucial for your spiritual and social well-being. You've just grappled with the Church's nuanced, yet often condemning, stance on folk practices. But beyond the formal religious institutions, another set of figures deeply entwined with animal-based remedies operated on the fringes of Tudor society. Local healers and witches, Enum. These cunning folk, as they were often known, and those accused of witchcraft, frequently incorporated animal parts, including rabbit hearts, into their potions and charms, sometimes for good, sometimes for ill. Imagine walking through your village and seeing a small, secluded cottage, perhaps with herbs drying by the door and a faint, earthy smell emanating from within. This might be the dwelling of a local healer, a cunning woman or cunning man who served as the community's informal doctor, advisor, and charm maker. These individuals were often sought out when mainstream medicine, such as it was, failed, or for problems beyond its scope, like ill luck, love troubles, or suspected curses. They possessed a vast, inherited knowledge of herbalism, local superstitions, and the esoteric properties of various objects, including animal parts. Mainstream historical fact. Cunning folk provided a wide range of services, including healing, fortune-telling, and charm-making, and were often distinct from those accused of malefic witchcraft. For these healers, the rabbit heart would be a valuable component in their pharmacopoeia of charms. They might prescribe it for you to consume for courage, or incorporate it into a fertility charm. The perceived potency of the heart, combined with its accessibility, made it a go-to ingredient. The healer might add specific rituals to its preparation or consumption, making it seem more powerful and tailored to your specific need. You'd likely trust their wisdom, drawn from generations of local knowledge, often more than a distant, university-trained physician who rarely visited your village. It's like consulting a local specialist, but for your soul and luck, rather than your physical ailments. However, the line between a benevolent, cunning person and a malevolent witch was incredibly fine and often blurred. If a remedy failed, or if misfortune followed the client, the healer could quickly become the target of suspicion. The same ingredients, like a rabbit heart, that could be used for good luck might also be twisted into a component for a curse in the minds of frightened villagers. A dried rabbit heart, meant to bring courage, could suddenly be seen as a witch's familiar or part of a harmful spell. Historians still argue whether the accusations of witchcraft against cunning folk were primarily due to the failure of their remedies or pre-existing societal anxieties. Those accused of witchcraft, often vulnerable or marginalized women, were sometimes forced to confess to using animal parts, including hearts, in their dark practices. These confessions, often extracted under duress, further cemented the association of such ingredients with illicit magic in the public imagination. Even if the actual practice was intended for healing or good fortune, this created a perilous environment for anyone dealing with such remedies. So, while the Tudor person might acquire a rabbit heart for their own personal use, they might also seek guidance or special preparation from a local healer, or, conversely, find themselves caught in the terrifying web of a witchcraft accusation if their actions, however innocent, were misconstrued. The rabbit heart, a symbol of life and luck, also carried with it the very real shadow of peril for those who dared to believe in its supernatural power. You probably wouldn't survive being accused of witchcraft, so you'd choose your local healer very carefully. You've just glimpsed the perilous world of local healers and the shadow of witchcraft. For the habit of eating rabbit hearts to persist, however, it needed more than just a theoretical belief. It required tangible validation, however anecdotal. This brings us to the crucial role of personal anecdotes, the sharing of success stories that perpetuated the habit among common folk and kept hope alive. Imagine you're gathered with your neighbors around a crackling fire on a cold Tudor evening. One person recounts how their child, once sickly and timid, became noticeably bolder and healthier after eating a piece of rabbit heart. It was like a miracle, they might exclaim, their eyes wide with conviction. Another might chime in, an old Master Giles, who couldn't find a wife for love nor money, ate one, and within the year, he was wed to the prettiest lass in the village. These were the stories that mattered, far more than any abstract scientific theory or religious condemnation. Mainstream historical fact, oral tradition, and anecdotal evidence were primary means of transmitting and validating folk remedies and superstitions in pre-literate or semi-literate societies. These personal testimonials, passed from mouth to mouth, family to family, and village to village, served as powerful evidence for the efficacy of the rabbit heart. They were relatable, immediate, and often came from trusted sources, a neighbor, a relative, a respected elder. You would hear these stories and think, if it worked for them, why not for me? This peer validation bypassed any intellectual skepticism, speaking directly to your hopes and fears. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of these anecdotes reflects genuine improvements, perhaps due to placebo effect, or simply the human tendency to remember successes and forget failures. The nature of the success was often subjective. Was the child truly bolder, or did the parents simply perceive them to be so after a deeply hoped-for intervention? Did Giles truly find love because of the heart, or did a fortuitous meeting coincide with his desperate ritual? For the Tudor mind, these distinctions were largely irrelevant. The result was what counted, and if a rabbit heart was believed to be the catalyst, then its power was confirmed. It's like believing your lucky shirt helps your sports team win, then telling everyone when they do, but quietly changing it if they lose. These anecdotes also provided specific examples of how the heart could be used and what it could achieve, reinforcing the preparation rituals and the intended outcomes. They shaped the popular understanding of the heart's properties, dictating when and for whom it was most effective. A story about a heart consumed for courage before a harvest dispute would encourage others facing similar confrontations. The sharing of these stories created a self-sustaining cycle of belief. Each anecdote, however flimsy its empirical basis, breathed new life into the tradition, inspiring others to try it, and in turn, generating new successes to be shared. In a world without widespread scientific literacy or verifiable data, personal experience, however flawed, was the most compelling form of proof. You probably wouldn't survive a life without hope, and these personal stories offered a glimmer of it. However strange the source, you've just witnessed how personal anecdotes fueled the rabbit heart habit across communities. But Tudor England was not a homogeneous entity. It was a patchwork of regions, each with its own quirks and traditions. This leads us to consider how regional variations might have influenced the habit, leading to differences in practice or belief depending on where you lived. Imagine traveling from the bustling markets of London to a remote village nestled in the West Country, or a windswept fishing community along the coast, while certain core beliefs in luck and animal symbolism were widespread. The specific ways they manifested, including the consumption of rabbit hearts, could differ. A remedy considered potent in one county might be unheard of, or used for a completely different purpose. Just a few shires away, mainstream historical fact, folkloric practices, and local superstitions in Tudor England often exhibited significant regional variations due to isolation and distinct cultural developments. For instance, in areas where rabbits were particularly abundant, perhaps due to large warrens or extensive hunting grounds, the habit of consuming their hearts might have been more prevalent and less remarkable. It was an accessible resource, so its use in folk medicine would be more commonplace. Conversely, in regions where rabbits were scarcer, perhaps other animals' hearts, or different types of charms entirely, might have been preferred for similar purposes. You wouldn't find a local healer prescribing a rabbit heart if rabbits were a rarity. The specific cunning folk and their inherited knowledge also played a role. A local healer in Kent might have a traditional recipe for a courage charm involving a rabbit heart, passed down through their family, while a healer in Yorkshire might use it only for fertility or for a completely different animal organ. These localized trademark practices contributed to the regional variations. Historians still argue whether these regional differences were simply a matter of available resources or deeper, distinct cultural legacies. Consider, too, the influence of local dialects and unique regional proverbs. A rabbit or coney might have slightly different symbolic associations or even different names depending on the locality, subtly influencing how its heart was perceived and used. The stories shared, the anecdotes we just discussed, would also naturally develop regional flavors, reinforcing specific local interpretations of the heart's power. It's a bit like how different parts of a country have different local sports teams or slang phrases. Everyone knows the main game, but the specifics change. These regional nuances highlight the organic, decentralized nature of folk beliefs. There wasn't a central governing body issuing decrees on how to use rabbit hearts. Instead, the practices evolved in response to local conditions, available resources, and the wisdom or superstition of local community leaders and healers. You, as a Tudor person, would likely grow up learning the specific habits and beliefs of your immediate area, making them feel like universal truths, unaware of the subtle differences just a day's journey away. So, while the broad phenomenon of eating rabbit hearts for luck was a Tudor-wide curiosity, its specific manifestation was a tapestry woven with countless regional threads. Each local variation added a unique hue to this fascinating historical habit, demonstrating the rich diversity of belief in a seemingly homogeneous era. You probably wouldn't survive a cross-country journey without noticing some strange local customs, and the rabbit heart was certainly one of them. You've just explored how regional differences flavored the rabbit heart habit. Now, let's re-examine who was actually partaking in this peculiar practice, because while it was undeniably common, the Ma-class divide played a fascinating role. While often associated with the rural poor or superstitious peasantry, even the wealthy and noble might secretly partake in such beliefs, albeit with different motivations and methods. Imagine a grand banquet in a noble household. You see the lord and lady dressed in lavish silks and velvet, outwardly projecting an image of sophistication and education. You might assume such ignorant superstitions were beneath them, but behind closed doors or in hushed conversations with trusted confidants, their anxieties were often as profound as those of their lowliest tenant. They feared illness, infertility, political downfall, and divine displeasure just as much, if not more. Mainstream historical fact: despite advancements in education and the rise of Protestantism, superstition remained prevalent among all social classes in Tudor and early modern England, including the elite. For the common Tudor person, eating a rabbit heart for luck might be a desperate, last-ditch effort, born of necessity and limited resources. It was an accessible charm for everyday struggles, a meager harvest, a sickly child, or simply hoping for a bit of good fortune. The act might be more overt, perhaps consumed whole or mixed into common gruel, without much concern for refinement, only efficacy. You probably wouldn't survive a serious setback without resorting to whatever means possible, and a rabbit heart was a readily available option. For the nobility, however, the motivations might be different. They weren't usually worrying about a failed harvest for their own sustenance. Instead, they might seek courage before a battle or a crucial political maneuver, fertility to secure a male heir, or protection against the intricate web of courtly intrigues and accusations of witchcraft. Their luck often meant safeguarding their immense wealth, power, and lineage. The stakes were higher, leading to an equally intense, if more discreet, reliance on such charms. Historians still argue whether the nobility's participation in folk magic was a genuine expression of belief or a strategic adoption of popular practices to gain influence and appear connected to their subjects. The method of consumption would also vary by class. While a peasant might simply roast and eat a heart from their own catch, a noble might have it meticulously dried, powdered, and then discreetly mixed into a rare wine or a refined confection by a trusted servant. This subtle integration allowed them to partake in the superstitious practice without openly compromising their educated image. It was a private indulgence, a secret hedge against fate. It's like a modern CEO secretly consulting a tarot card reader before a big merger, but then publicly attributing success to market forces. The commonality of the rabbit itself across all social strata also facilitated this cross-class belief. Everyone ate rabbit. It was a familiar and accessible animal, making its heart a universally recognized symbol, even if its specific application varied with wealth and education. This shared foundation of animal lore allowed the habit to persist across the entire social spectrum, demonstrating that when it came to the unpredictable forces of life, everyone, regardless of their station, was looking for a little bit of an edge. You might not survive a loss of social standing, and a little bit of rabbit heart luck was just one more layer of protection. You've just seen how the rabbit heart habit transcended the class divide, finding its way into both humble cottages and grand manor houses. But for any such peculiar tradition to endure, it had to be actively transmitted. This brings us to passing down the tradition. How these odd yet deeply significant habits were taught, maintained, and perpetuated across generations in Tudor England. Imagine yourself as a young Tudor child, perhaps sitting by the hearth, listening intently as your grandmother recounts tales of good luck and bad omens. She might show you how to tie a knot for a specific purpose, or how to identify herbs for a healing poultice. Among these lessons, she might also discreetly explain the power of the rabbit heart, how it could bring courage, ensure fertility, or ward off illness. These were not formal lessons. They were embedded in the fabric of daily life, learned through observation, participation, and storytelling. Mainstream historical fact, folkloric beliefs and practices, including traditional remedies and superstitions, were primarily transmitted orally and experientially within families and communities in early modern Europe. Children would learn by watching their parents or elders prepare a rabbit for consumption, observing the careful removal of the heart and its special handling. They might then be instructed in the specific ritual of eating it, or how to dry and powder it for later use. This hands-on learning, combined with the reinforcing anecdotes of successes within the family or village, cemented the practice in their minds as a valid and potentially powerful tool against life's uncertainties. You probably wouldn't survive long if you didn't learn the practical skills and beliefs of your community, and this included its peculiar charms. The context for learning was often one of necessity or desperation. A child suffering from chronic illness might be given a rabbit heart by a loving, desperate parent. A young couple struggling to conceive might be advised by elders to try the remedy. These were moments of vulnerability, where traditional wisdom, however strange, offered a glimmer of hope and was readily accepted. It's like learning how to ride a bicycle from your parent, but the bicycle might occasionally buck and kick you off. And then you just try again. Historians still argue whether the continuity of these traditions was a sign of intellectual stagnation or a testament to the resilience of cultural practices in the face of changing formal beliefs. It was likely both. Despite the rise of formal education and the shifting religious landscape, the practical knowledge and comfort derived from these ancestral habits were difficult to dislodge. They offered immediate, tangible, if only psychologically so, solutions to problems that formal institutions often could not address. The passing down of these traditions also speaks to the strong communal bonds in Tudor society. Knowledge wasn't just individual, it was shared, communal property, especially that which related to survival, health, and well-being. The secrets of the rabbit heart were not exclusive. They belonged to the collective memory and practices of the village or family unit. So, the peculiar habit of eating rabbit hearts for luck and health endured not because of written decrees or scientific validation, but through the intimate, personal transmission of belief from one generation to the next. It was a legacy woven into the very fabric of daily life, a testament to the enduring human need to pass on tools, however strange, that might help their descendants navigate the unpredictable currents of fate. You might not survive in a new land without your ancestral knowledge. And for Tudors, the rabbit heart was a piece of that vital inheritance. You've just witnessed how the rabbit heart habit was faithfully passed down through generations. But no tradition remains static forever, especially as the world outside the village gate began to change. This leads us to the decline of the practice, a slow and gradual fading of eating rabbit hearts as medical understanding evolved and new societal norms took hold. Imagine the dawn of the 18th century, a time of burgeoning reason and scientific discovery. While not an overnight revolution, the intellectual currents of the Enlightenment began to trickle down, slowly eroding the foundations of pervasive superstition. The focus shifted from appeasing unseen forces to understanding natural laws. This nascent scientific inquiry, however rudimentary, started to offer alternative explanations for illness and misfortune, gradually diminishing the perceived need for charms like the rabbit heart. Mainstream historical fact. The Enlightenment and the scientific revolution gradually led to a decline in the overt practice of many traditional folk, magical remedies in favor of more empirical approaches, though superstition persisted. As medical knowledge advanced, albeit slowly, More effective, or at least less bizarre, remedies began to emerge. The development of early pharmacies, the growing understanding of hygiene, and the slow professionalization of doctors meant that people had more reliable and less gruesome options for treating ailments. If a fever could be treated with a specific bark extract, why would you bother with a rabbit heart? The direct, observable results of early pharmacological interventions began to outweigh the subjective luck offered by traditional charms. You probably wouldn't survive a serious illness with just a rabbit heart if a better cure was available. Furthermore, societal attitudes towards explicit superstition began to shift, particularly among the educated classes. Practices like eating animal hearts for luck started to be viewed as quaint, ignorant, or even embarrassing relics of a less enlightened past. While people might still harbor private superstitions, the public display or open recommendation of such habits became less common. The pressure to conform to more rational thinking gradually marginalized these practices, pushing them further into the rural fringes or into complete secrecy. Historians still argue whether the decline was primarily due to genuine disbelief or social pressure to appear more modern and rational. The decline was not uniform across all regions or social classes. In remote rural areas, where access to new medical knowledge was limited and traditional ways held strong, the habit might have persisted for much longer. Among the very poor, who still relied on readily available resources and traditional knowledge, it might have remained a desperate measure when all else failed. However, the overall trajectory was clear. The direct, visceral consumption of animal hearts for luck began to recede from common practice. It wasn't actively forbidden in the same way witchcraft might be, but it slowly lost its perceived efficacy in the face of new understanding. The once powerful charm became an anachronism, a curious footnote in the long history of human attempts to control an unpredictable world. The rabbit heart, once a symbol of fervent hope, gradually became just another piece of offal. You might not survive in a society that increasingly valued reason above all else if you clung too tightly to old ways. You've just seen the slow retreat of the rabbit heart from common practice, driven by changing medical knowledge. Yet, the underlying human impulse that fueled it didn't simply vanish. Instead, the quest for luck and control found new, less gruesome expressions, leading to a fascinating legacy in other habits. Traces of these older, stranger beliefs persisted, evolving into different forms that you might still recognize today. Imagine stepping into the 18th or 19th century. While eating a raw rabbit heart might seem outlandish, people still clung to charms and rituals. A rabbit's foot, for instance, a direct descendant of the rabbit's fertility and luck symbolism, became a widespread good luck charm. You'd find them carried in pockets, hung in homes, or even attached to keychains, offering a small, tangible piece of fortune without the need for ingestion. This was a sanitized, more socially acceptable version of the older practice, maintaining the connection to the animal's perceived magical properties without the visceral act of consumption. Mainstream historical fact: the rabbit's foot evolved into a widely recognized good luck charm, a symbolic continuation of earlier beliefs in the animal's magical properties. Think about other animal-related superstitions that endured. The belief that a black cat crossing your path brings bad luck, or that finding a four-leaf clover brings good fortune. These are all echoes of the sympathetic magic and animistic beliefs that underpin the Tudor habit of eating rabbit hearts. The essence of the belief that certain objects or natural phenomena possess inherent, transferable power remained, merely shifting its outward manifestation. It's like upgrading your operating system. The core functions are still there, just with a different interface. Even seemingly unrelated superstitions have roots in this ancient need for control. Tapping wood to ward off bad luck, throwing salt over your shoulder, or crossing your fingers. These are all ritualistic acts, performed without much conscious thought today, but stemming from a deep-seated historical desire to influence unpredictable outcomes. They are the distant, less intense cousins of consuming a rabbit heart, offering a psychological sense of agency in a chaotic world. Historians still argue whether the persistence of these milder superstitions is a sign of humanity's enduring irrationality or simply a comforting cultural habit passed down through generations. Perhaps it's a bit of both. They provide a harmless way to acknowledge the unpredictable nature of fate, without resorting to more extreme or potentially dangerous measures. You probably wouldn't survive life's uncertainties without some coping mechanisms, and these minor superstitions offer a tiny, comforting illusion of control. So, while the specific habit of eating rabbit hearts for luck may have largely faded, its spirit lives on in countless other ways. The human desire to harness fortune, to protect oneself from unseen forces, and to find tangible comfort in a chaotic world continues to manifest, albeit in forms that are far less likely to make you queasy at bedtime. The legacy of the rabbit heart is not just in history books, but in the subtle, unspoken rituals that still pepper our daily lives. You've just seen how the spirit of the rabbit heart lives on in milder superstitions. This evolution was profoundly influenced by a much larger tidal wave of change, how when Tudor medicine evolves. The slow, arduous journey from humoral theory and folk remedies to a more empirical, scientific understanding of the human body directly undermined the perceived efficacy of practices like eating rabbit hearts. Imagine yourself in the early 17th century, where medical schools were slowly becoming more established, and physicians, though still flawed, were beginning to rely less on ancient texts and more on observation. The direct, hands-on study of anatomy through dissection, however gruesome, began to reveal the true functions of organs. The heart, once the mystical seat of courage and soul, was increasingly understood as a muscular pump circulating blood. This new, albeit nascent, physiological understanding left little room for the belief that consuming it could transfer abstract qualities like bravery or luck. Mainstream historical fact. The 17th century saw significant shifts in medical understanding, moving away from purely humoral pathology towards more anatomical and observational approaches. This isn't to say that all superstition vanished overnight. Far from it. But the intellectual groundwork was being laid for a world where disease was seen as a malfunction of the body, rather than a spiritual affliction or a stroke of ill luck. Remedies began to be sought in chemicals, precise herbal extractions, and eventually in surgical interventions based on anatomical knowledge, rather than sympathetic magic. You probably wouldn't survive a serious fever if your doctor only offered you a rabbit heart and a prayer in this evolving medical landscape. The development of microscopes, though crude, allowed for glimpses into the unseen world of microbes, eventually leading to the understanding of infection. This meant that diseases once attributed to curses or bad humors could slowly begin to be understood in terms of microscopic invaders. This shift directly challenged the notion that a rabbit heart could ward off evil or cure illness by mystical means. Historians still argue whether medical advancements directly caused a decline in superstition or if it was a more complex interplay with broader societal and religious changes. Furthermore, the legal and professional frameworks around medicine became more robust. Quackery, while still present, faced increasing scrutiny, and the public became, however gradually, more discerning. The authority of traditional healers and cunning folk, who often incorporated animal parts like the rabbit heart into their practice, began to wane as formally trained physicians gained more prominence and legal standing. The rabbit heart, once a symbol of desperate hope in a world of medical uncertainty, slowly lost its place as a credible therapeutic agent. It became a curious historical footnote, a testament to a time when people grasped at any straw, however strange, in their battle against an invisible enemy. The era of the rabbit heart as medicine ended not with a bang, but with a slow, almost imperceptible whisper, as the light of scientific inquiry began to shine, however faintly, on the mysteries of the human body. You might not survive in a new, more rational world if you didn't adapt your beliefs, and medicine certainly did. You've just witnessed how the slow, inevitable march of medical science relegated the rabbit heart to the archives of odd history. But despite centuries of progress, The fundamental human impulse to seek out good fortune and exert a sense of control over life's unpredictability hasn't disappeared. This brings us to one modern echoes of luck. Surprising parallels to the Tudor habit that manifest in contemporary superstitions and good luck charms you encounter every single day. Imagine your own life right now. You might not eat a rabbit heart for courage before a job interview, but you might wear your lucky tie or carry a lucky coin in your pocket. You might cross your fingers when hoping for a positive outcome or avoid walking under a ladder. These seemingly harmless actions are direct descendants of the same human need that drove Tudors to consume animal organs. They offer a psychological comfort, a small, tangible ritual in the face of uncertainty. Mainstream historical fact. Many modern superstitions and good luck charms are secularized or vestigial forms of older magical beliefs and folk practices. Think about the widespread belief in lucky numbers or lucky colors. You might choose a certain lottery ticket number because it's your birthday, or wear a particular color to a big event, believing it will bring you good fortune. This is the same underlying principle as believing a rabbit heart, taken from a fertile animal, will bring you fecundity, a symbolic connection between an object or action and a desired outcome. It's like believing your favorite coffee mug gives you extra productivity, but with less anatomical involvement. The modern wellness industry, as we briefly touched upon before, also offers intriguing parallels. While no one is openly selling rabbit hearts for courage, you'll find countless superfoods, detox drinks, and energy boosters marketed with promises of vitality, youth, and overall well-being. These products often rely on exotic or natural ingredients, their efficacy often supported by anecdotal testimonials rather than rigorous scientific proof. Much like the rabbit heart success stories, you might consume a green smoothie believing it will cleanse your soul, much as a Tudor person believed a rabbit heart would purify their spirit. Even in high-tech environments, superstitions persist. Professional athletes often have elaborate pre-game rituals, from wearing specific socks to repeating certain phrases, all to invite good luck. Traders on Wall Street might have lucky ties or pens. These are rational people, yet they still engage in practices that defy pure logic, showcasing the deep-seated, enduring human need for a sense of control, a small push from fate. Historians still argue whether these modern superstitions are merely cultural quirks or evidence of an inherent human tendency towards magical thinking. Regardless of technological advancement, while the specific, gruesome habit of eating rabbit hearts for luck may belong firmly to the past, the underlying human desires it address the quest for fortune, courage, fertility, and protection remain as potent as ever. They simply manifest in forms that are more palatable, more discreet, and perhaps a little less likely to raise an eyebrow at your next dinner party. You probably wouldn't survive life's unpredictable moments without a tiny bit of hope and a personal lucky charm. And in that, you're not so different from your Tudor ancestors. You've navigated the intriguing modern echoes of luck, seeing how our contemporary habits subtly mirror Tudor superstitions. Now, we reach the culmination of our journey, the Remarkable Rabbit Heart's final whisper, a reflection on the enduring human quest for control and luck, and how this peculiar historical habit encapsulates a timeless aspect of the human condition. Imagine, for a moment, the Tudor person holding that small, warm rabbit heart. In that raw, visceral moment, they weren't just eating an organ, they were consuming hope, courage, and a desperate plea to an unpredictable world. It was a tangible act in a life filled with intangibles, a moment of perceived agency against the overwhelming forces of disease, misfortune, and unrequited desires. This tiny beating or recently beating object represented a concentrated essence of life, to be absorbed and woven into their own fate. The story of eating rabbit hearts for luck is not just about a bizarre historical practice. It's a powerful metaphor for humanity's eternal struggle with uncertainty. Whether it's a Tudor peasant facing a failed harvest or a modern individual navigating a volatile job market, the fundamental desire for a favorable outcome, for a bit of control remains unchanged. We still seek comfort in rituals, in talismans, and in the belief that we can somehow influence our destiny. Mainstream historical fact: the human tendency to seek patterns, assign meaning, and engage in ritualistic behavior to influence perceived luck is a cross-cultural and historically persistent phenomenon. The habit reminds us of an era when the line between medicine and magic, science and superstition, was far more blurred. It highlights a time when people relied on intuitive connections and symbolic associations to make sense of a confusing and often terrifying world. The rabbit heart, with its contradictory symbolism of fertility and timidity, became a perfect canvas for projecting these varied human needs. Historians still argue whether the most compelling aspect of such historical practices is their strangeness or their deep insight into timeless human psychology. While we might scoff at the idea of consuming an animal heart for courage today, our own rituals of luck, from knocking on wood to wearing a lucky charm, serve a similar psychological purpose. They offer a moment of agency, a small flicker of hope that we are, however subtly, influencing the unpredictable currents of life. The rabbit heart, in its own odd way, was simply an earlier, more visceral version of these same comforting illusions. It's like comparing a stone tablet to an e-reader. The format changes, but the story being told, the core human experience, remains the same. As the sun sets on our exploration, let the image of that small rabbit heart, once so full of desperate hope, fade into the mists of history. It serves as a potent reminder of the ingenuity, the fear, and the enduring optimism of our ancestors. They sought luck in the most surprising places, consumed courage in the most peculiar forms, and ultimately found comfort in the strange rituals that tied them to the vast, mysterious universe. Now, as the last echoes of this story settle, let your mind drift. Feel the gentle hum of the silence, the softness of your surroundings. Rest easy, knowing that while some habits may be odd, the human quest for a little bit of luck is a journey we all, in some form, continue to share. Sweet dreams, and may your own path be filled with good fortune. Sweet dreams.